What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of All Out War. This is Turner, and I'm in the studio with Rosie. What's up, bro?
Hey, what's up?
How you doing?
Doing well. Doing well.
We had a week off. Well, 2 weeks off, actually. Right?
Sure.
Something like that. Yeah, we had a couple weeks off. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we're back.
Yeah, we got a good episode.
Dude, this is insane.
This is a good one.
This is
one overdue.
Overdue. One of my favorites so far we've ever done.
Yeah.
A long-wanted guest is going to be on. But anyways, what do you know, man?
Hey, so did you know that there is a country where a president was there is a man who was president 11 times who also lost a war in 18 minutes. The president got his wooden leg stolen by us, the Americans. He got exiled and lost in the jungle and had to get reintroduced into society because he turned feral.
It sounds like something Joe Biden would do, but
yeah,
or one of his rants.
Right? Yeah. So, can you guess what country?
Hey, Corn Pop.
Guess what country that had that as their leader?
Oh man, I'm gonna. It sounds like it's gonna be an African country of some kind.
No. Mexico.
No way.
Yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah. Mexico had his name was Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna.
De Santa Anna.
Oh, I'm sorry. That wasn't his full name. Let me give you his full name.
Okay.
Antonio de Padua Maria Severino Lopez de Santa Anna y Perez de Lebrón.
No way.
That's his real name. Yeah, he was president 11 times.
That's a big name.
He did not want to even be president sometimes. He just wanted the title, but he lost. He had his wooden leg. He had his leg blown off by in a war with the French. Had a wooden leg, and then the Americans came, and he rode off without the leg.
We stole his leg.
We stole his leg, and it's in...
we still have it?
Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
Sorry. It's in Illinois.
What? Like some war museum in Illinois?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So
his family's going to be like, can we get his leg back?
It's like 100 years.
Right.
Yeah. And the war, they lost in 18 minutes.
Who was that with?
Against us.
Oh, against us.
Yeah. So the Battle of San Jacinto.
San Jacinto,
man. On April 21st, 1836, the Texan Army under Sam Houston attacked Santa Anna's army on the banks of the San Jacinto River with cries of "Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad, God in Texas."
Nice.
The battle lasted only 18 minutes. It was a resounding victory for the Texans.
That's amazing.
So
cool. Well, that has absolutely nothing to do with it. It ties in no possible way with what we're going to talk about tonight, other than maybe the 18. We could figure out some way that number would, but it doesn't. But
yeah, not really.
So
1 + 8 is 9.
1 + 8 is 9. There you go. There's always some way to trick it. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, as we always say, sit back, grab a coffee, and enjoy.
You're listening to the All Out War podcast.
Well, everybody, we got a great guest tonight. I'm super excited. This is someone who I have respected and just been completely enthralled by his research. We have William Ramsey on the podcast with us. William, thank you for joining us so much.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, so we have a mutual friend, John Brisson. He's been on our podcast a bunch of times, probably the most of any other guest, and he encouraged me to reach out to you, so I really am grateful that you're here. For those of you that are listening that don't know William Ramsey, he has an amazing podcast. It's called William Ramsey Investigates. I'm going to put links to his podcast in the show notes, and he's written 3 or 4 different books on Aleister Crowley, on the Memphis 3, the Smiley Face Killers. He's just an amazing researcher, but tonight we want to talk about Aleister Crowley, and in particular, you've done some really cool research on connections with 9/11. So I'm excited to talk about that. But I do have one question for you before we jump into Aleister Crowley. How did you what spurred you on to do investigative research on him?
Right. Well, I really was kind of an independent 9/11 researcher by myself. Like after 9/11 happened, 2001, I think I graduated from law school in 98, passed the bar in California in 98, practiced, and then kind of came to the realization that 9/11 was a fiction. It was a hard realization to come to, actually, but it was just while researching, I was trying to find people who were not trying to lead me astray, but actually look at facts over this mysterious event. And one of the guys, unfortunately, he's passed away. His name he was part of something called the Ghost Troop, which has dissipated, but he was known as Captain May. And you can actually listen to him talking on my podcast because I uploaded one of his old things back. I'm at over 850 episodes now. But anyway, he did a lot of research, but what he noticed was this overpreponderance of the number 11 in all kinds of these events, and just 9/11 and everything. There were just all kinds of 11s. But he just saw it was a simple pattern recognition for him. So for me, I was like, oh, yeah, he's right. There is a number 11. I'd never studied the occult. I was raised Catholic. I consider myself a Bible-believing Christian now. But so then it was just kind of like slowly unfolding. I remember seeing people in Los Angeles wearing shirts with the 93 on them. I'm like, why is that 93 there? Because that's Flight 93. What does this mean? And it slowly kind of just unraveled that this number 11 was really a prime number of the Western esoteric tradition. And so then it was like, well, who's these people? What are they doing? What's this person, Aleister Crowley? Why is this 11 everywhere? And it led me really back to Crowley. So 9/11, I made that connection to Crowley's numerical system and really his religious system. And so that kind of led me to what's the really truth about it. So there was a lot of questioning, a lot of head scratching. I didn't really know anything. Now I know a lot about how the occult thinks, actually. But this was kind of like 2005, 2006. So just researching, reading, who's really Crowley? There's a lot of biographies out there. Some are from people who are very sympathetic to Crowley, if not outright occultists. There are people, academic versions. There's his own biography, which he called Confessions. So these were things that I just as a kind of research grinder was like, okay, well, what's this stuff? So I collected all those books and read through them. And I realized that his ideology and his outlook was a template or something like an etching of the events of 9/11. His ideas of kind of magic, influencing people, transforming things in conformance with his will. The 11 goes back to his book, The Book of the Law. And that really led to my first book in 2010, titled Aleister Crowley, 9/11, was Prophet of Evil. Aleister Crowley, 9/11 and the New World Order. And he really considered himself a prophet. And in a very superficial way, I had remembered people saying, oh, Crowley is a dilettante, Crowley is a dabbler. But my reading of Crowley from when he got out of Cambridge was he was a very serious intellectual and a scholar of the occult. He spent all his time. He was very wealthy. So it really led me back to try to go back to the core documents of Aleister Crowley. And that's really kind of what I did. I kind of figured who really knew Crowley too, not just me kind of looking back. I mean, Crowley lived from 1875 to 1947. So it was really like, who is this person? So I went back and tried to find notable figures who knew him. And there's a lot. There were people who had met him or seen him. Some in America wouldn't know, but some people, Ernest Hemingway, for example, people would know that name, who knew of Crowley in Europe. Somerset Maugham is a well-known kind of writer. People would know his name. So who really was Crowley? What did people think about him? And I found other names of people who knew him. People wouldn't really know their names. Clifford Bax and Lance Steve King. Some people might know him if you're in the UK. So anyway, that was kind of what I did. And I just showed that Crowley wasn't just an occultist, but he had political ideas. He really wanted to create, and this is actually a common theme within the occult, is to actually create kind of a magical world. Not just having a magical worldview, but changing the culture to this kind of a magic or occult kind of practices. So they have, like I would say, Christians have the Great Commission. or the desire to transform people's lives through Christ. Well, I'd say the occultists have something very similar, where they are going out to find followers, to find people who are interested, to train people in the occult. And really, Crowley really at core really was a Satanist. I mean, I think that he was a much more cultured Satanist, but so I think that that's really kind of where my interest in Crowley started. It actually came out of 9/11, believe it or not.
And that's awesome intro. There's a ton there. So let's talk about a little bit about how it goes from Aleister Crowley, like historically, to 9/11, because, you know, as you said, he was born in the 1800s. Go ahead, Rosie.
Oh yeah, I was going to say could you give a little bit into who Crowley was before you start connecting? I was going to say before 9/11 here's this guy that, like you said, is connected with so many people that are the movers and shakers of not just, I mean, Ernest Hemingway, one of the most famous authors of all time.
Yeah.
And then, you know, political people, just kind of, he was just I don't know why the term mover and shakers are still stuck in my head, but he wasn't just some like, I don't want to say he wasn't just a nut job, because he was, but that he was really influencing, and his ideas, you know, he was in the milieu of people that, you know, mattered more or less, right? So
no, it's a good point. So he knew other writers, H.L. Mencken, people might know that name. He was actually really a elitist aristocrat. So he was a single only child, born in 1875, died in 1947, 72. He was an only child, educated in what we would call in the States private schools, Cambridge, very well educated, left without obtaining a degree, thought he was above it. And then really his three interests were occultism, poetry, and mountain climbing. So he was internationally world traveled. He's kind of an interesting character because he's never really in one place. Like a lot of people, you can see where their home is and they live in one place. Crowley kind of traveled a lot. He went to Switzerland for mountaineering hikes. He went all the way to India, so he would travel, you know, right at the apex of the English Empire. So he was really had a benefit of this being as an aristocrat at the apex of really one of the biggest empires of all time, which, you know, they say that famously the sun never set on the English Empire.
Yeah.
So he would go to India and he learned all this stuff there, yoga, things really kind of before kind of the New Age movement of the 60s or stuff. So he would integrate yogic ideas, Hindu ideas, things from Chinese occultism. So he was always kind of practicing that stuff. But really it's a very classist, aristocratic sensibility. So he really only mixed with other people he felt were in his class, like well-known actresses, actors, writers, politicians, a lot of famous people that he associated with in his life, right? You know, he was I would call him a literateur, somebody who could write poetry and prose. His poetry never really gelled with the kind of poetry community, but he also wrote for like things that you might even know today, which is like Vanity Fair. Right. But yeah, so he was a true elitist, and he believed in that the best political system was a feudal system. So you see when you read, like, I think if you read Prophet of Evil, you'll see overlaps of what's happening today. This kind of neo-feudalism, the 15-minute cities, you'll own nothing and be happy. It's basically just what a serf was, right? A serf was just you know, they're really trying to create a neo-serfdom, these elitists. And a lot of them are sympathetic to Crowley. And that's kind of the mystery of Crowley, is that he called himself a priest to the princes. So he was not trying to convert the rank and file. He was trying to find the he wrote in this is in Prophet of Evil. He was trying to find the diamonds and polish them. So I think that those ideas really permeated. And my follow-up book to this, I kind of got sidetracked with the West Memphis 3 murders, but my follow-up book to Prophet of Evil was published. Prophet of Evil now is on its 3rd edition. So it's been 12 years and I've updated it many times. But the real thing is the Children of the Beast. Crowley dies in 47, but a lot of people he influenced are very influential. Leary, Hubbard, Parsons, who you mentioned in the pre-show, so many bands, Led Zeppelin, connections to the Rolling Stones, so many artists as well, that it's pretty surprising. And so his ideas, and that was really his goal. Like he called it the birth of the child. He was trying to create this age of Horus, just like I said. So he had kind of weird terminology that doesn't come out of kind of the Christian worldview, but he really was trying to kind of almost go back to almost like an Egyptian household gods kind of man as God, and you have your household gods as opposed to the kind of biblical Old Testament God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, that kind of thing.
What was his source of wealth? How did he become so wealthy to travel in those circles?
That's a good question. So he was born into the Crowley family. They were a beer brewing family, but they also made money selling sandwiches and food items in pubs all around England. So they just accrued money. His dad was very fastidious and a hard worker. He died when he was 12. His father died. But his father was also a pamphleteer. But it seems like something happened to Crowley, like he was in the care of his mother, who he thought was kind of a shrill, shrew or something like that, and his uncle. And that's kind of where his rebellion kind of started, was after his father died, who he says he really admired. But so that money really propelled him as an only child. He had a sister who died, I think, in childbirth or very young. But that went on. And when his mother died, I think it was in the early 20th century, he was an heir to like a 20 million pound or 20 million American dollars fortune, like an extraordinary amount of money that he literally frittered away. But by the time he was in his 50s or 60s, he had spent it all just carelessly. He had a very casual view of money, and always had very high tastes. He kind of expected the highest taste. So he stayed at the nicest hotels. He traveled in the nicest groups. He spent on the finest wines and food and things like that. But he blew it away, and he kind of like regretted it later. He just always expected a check to come. So he was kind of like a spoiled rich kid, I think. And a lot of his attitudes are kind of like consistent with what we would call kind of a spoiled, privileged rich kid in a lot of ways. He never worked a day in his life. He never worked an honest job in his life. I mean, imagine that for 72 years. Like, he never worked for anybody. He just, and he spent money, very much a lot of money for like his books and his bindings. So it had the nice kind of vellum or whatever, doe skin covers. Yeah. And you can still see those. And I've been in private collections in schools around the country where they're remarkably well put together books. Like, he did not spare a dime for, his recreations of magic and theory and practice and things like that. But that's kind of like his kind of attitude of Crowley's kind of view. But like I said, he was trying to influence things. He told this guy, Clifford Bax, like, now you see we're in the sunset of Christianity, and in the future it will be Crowleyanity. So he really was trying to create a religion. He did create a religion. That religion he called Thelema, which is will, right? It's a Greek word for will. And will and Thelema is will, and agape is the Greek word for love. And in his system, like when he would run through the gematria, which is taking a word and giving it a numerical value, he found that both Thelema and will added up to 93. So 93 was kind of an important distillation of his concepts. And you'll see in some of his later writings, instead of writing Aleister Crowley, he would just say 93, 93, 93. And you'll see that emulated in Thelemites around the world today. So that 93, that's why it pops up in 9/11. So I really kind of laid out the book as like Crowley bio, ideas, what the numerology of Crowley. Crowley didn't think numbers were like independently powerful. His numerology referenced concepts. So some people think like, no, numbers have power, but his 11 was like the primary number because it was the number of magic. It was the addition of the macrocosm and microcosm, symbolized by the pentagram and the hexagram, right? So you put those together, you have 11, and that's a principle that goes through the Western esoteric tradition. It's not something Crowley just made up. So you'll see the K's involved, which is the 11th letter of the alphabet. And then you'll just see the 11 go through all of Crowley's kind of system. And you'll see that in, it's mentioned in the Book of the Law, those who are 11 are those of us. It's mentioned. It goes through his famous kind of dictum, which is do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, is 11 words, 11 syllables. So he was trying to do things to give his ideas that kind of magical resonance is what I would call it. So.
For his religion, Thelema, that he came up with, what was the process for that? Was it just developed sort of over time? What was the process for that? Do you know?
It's a good question. So he grew, his kind of arc of his occult training started out when he was at Cambridge. He was reading something called like A Cloud in the Mist. There was some kind of esoteric stuff. He came across Blavatsky, and then he met some people who were involved in a group, a post-Masonic group. That means they were after going through all of Masonry. It was called the Golden Dawn, and it included kind of the elite of London, people that you would know, like the guy who wrote Butler Yeats, was E.A. Yeats or whatever. Anyway, he got through that. So he trained in all of their secret doctrines. He made an oath of silence. He would never reveal them. So he went through that. Then he eventually got kicked out. The Golden Dawn kind of fell apart. Then he published some of the rituals against, and then he had a lawsuit. So there's a very easily referenced lawsuit that he had with a guy who was really kind of his mentor. His name was MacGregor Mathers. And you can see that Crowley kind of lifted a lot of Mathers' ideas. Mathers had this penchant for wearing very florid attire with leopard skins and staves and staves. So Crowley, that was kind of his progression, was through the Golden Dawn. Then he had this Abramelin the Mage ritual that he did up in Boleskine, up on literally on the Loch Ness kind of monster lake. So then he progressed and started his own group, the AA. Then he had this kind of the most important thing that he said happened in his life, which is the receipt of the Book of the Law in Cairo, Egypt in 1904. It happened over 3 days. And the Book of the Law became the central element of his religion of Thelema. He said that a being called Awas stood over his shoulder for an hour a day over 3 days and dictated to him this kind of mysterious book. And you can see his writing. I included it in my book, and you can see it in my documentary on Prophet of Evil. So he wrote about that, and then that became kind of a central thing, is this receipt of his ideas, and the ideas kind of permeate his religion of Thelema. He then became involved in this group called the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was a German group. And he eventually became its head in 1925 and integrated into the OTO a lot of his ideas. But his Thelema, he organized everything on kind of numerology. He had tons of rituals. He had all kinds of coded language, sexual language. And he had this what he called the discovery that was consistent with or concurrent with the OTO, which was adding drugs and sexual behavior into these rituals. And so that was kind of that's what being known as sex magic. And then that was it. So then it just went on. And so then he became the outer head of the OTO until his death, I think in 1947. Never really gave up the reins. So
it's always amazing to me when you see the rise of these cults, how something gave them the information. Like you talked about how this Ayahuasca stood over his shoulder for 3 days and dictated to him this writing. And I think about, Joseph Smith with Mormonism, and even Muhammad with Islam, when he received from, an angel, supposedly Gabriel. But the whole idea of this Thelema, and it's also amazing to me too. You mentioned Blavatsky had influenced him. It's always the same people, right?
Yeah. And John Dee.
John
Dee.
So
he was, so he would do Dee's rituals. There's actually recordings of Aleister Crowley conducting these Aethers, Aethyrs, these Aether kind of rituals these calls that John Dee and Kelly did. So actually, it's interesting you mentioned Joseph Smith. Crowley admired Smith from afar, and I think he did because he recognized him as a fellow traveler. And they did the same rituals. So John Dee found Kelly, right? So Kelly, they would do this ritual where, and you can look this up. This is all verifiable. Kelly would look into a hat and look and talk, and then, Kelly would write it down, but Dee would look into the hat and talk. And then Crowley does the same thing with a guy by the name of Victor Newberg, using Dee's tablets and stuff like that in the desert of Algeria, the same technique. And then Joseph Smith does the same technique. This is actually part of the Mormon religion.
Yeah.
This is actually what they talk about. And you can see Joseph Smith's shoe stone in a museum in Utah.
Right.
Like, he shows this black glass stone. So Joseph Smith is literally looking down, and his guy Sidney Rigdon is writing things down, just like Crowley, Newberg, and Dee and Kelly. The same thing. And there's actually an interesting thing that even Mormons should kind of scratch their head, is that Joseph Smith's receipt of the Book of Law isn't consistent, because he says he translated from these golden plates, but also conducted this ritual. So what is it? Like, maybe I have to go back through and look at that again, but the Book of the Law is a received book. I mean, the Book of Mormon is a received book, and there's a lot more received books than you would think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys are receiving things from beings and entities and stuff.
It sounds like he wanted to be John Dee, but to a different group of people rather than just Queen, the Queen or whatever.
Yeah, I think that it's part of the magic, the esoteric tradition. Like, I know people who are magicians today who go back and look at Dee's stuff. And Dee's writings were pretty voluminous. He was definitely a genius in thinking on different levels, and people played. I mean, this is Elizabethan England. People have made some pretty vast views of Dee's ideas, like as a cartographer and stuff like that. So very interesting, but definitely talking to entities very much like somebody would be a paranormal person today, like Dee and Kelly. And they ended up it gets pretty dark, but and Crowley too was definitely he was definitely coveting communication from other beings. His whole, whether it's Iwas, he had different workings, he had different beings. One he called the magician or the wizard, and then there were just other contacts and spiritual events. So he was looking for spiritual events, but from a occult perspective, for sure.
Did Aleister Crowley have any connections with Nazi Germany or any of the workings of going on there? Because the occult practices within Hitler's
The SS.
all of that was. It sounds eerily familiar. Did he have connections there at all?
Well, I actually wrote a book. I wrote in part of my book. It's Aleister Crowley and Adolf Hitler. I can't remember the actual title of that section, but they had a very similar outlook. And Crowley, after the war, kind of infamously and very darkly said, "Before Hitler was, I am." So I think he understood how much. I would say that Crowley was kind of the intellectual part of Hitler being the political part, because their outlooks and their views were creepily and eerily similar. The triumph of the will, right? So Crowley writes the Lema of the Will, and their kind of occultism and their view towards other people, the neo-feudalism of the Nazi state, right? They had like the elite elect, and then all the slaves. They had a huge slave state. People, slave labor. If they didn't kill them off, they enslaved them. Super dark. So there are weird connections between Crowley and Hitler. Crowley was in, I think the evidence shows, and there's a really good book called Secret Agent 666 by Spence, but it showed his name was Richard Spence. He found documentation that confirmed that Crowley was working for the British government as an intel agent in in New York during World War I. So that's verified. So Crowley was also in Italy at a strange time, right when Mussolini marched on Rome, the black shirts, right? And he eventually got kicked out of Italy by Mussolini personally. Mussolini personally wrote the edict that kicked Crowley out of Italy. And then Crowley went to France and got kicked out of France. And then he ends up, like, he was suspiciously sending stuff to the Germans. Then he ends up in Weimar, Germany, I think, until Hitler came to power. So his time in in that very chaotic time in Germany is very strange. And some people have tried to make connections, and there are people who were trying to get the Book of the Law and Crowley stuff to Hitler. But Hitler was an esotericist. There's absolutely no question about it, that he was involved in the Thule Society, involved in getting books from other occultists in Germany. There was a book that I include that's strangely similar to Crowley's writing, but the guy's name was Schertl, and I include it in, and it's a book that was in Hitler's library that was unfortunately not found totally intact, but it's at Brown University, and Hitler was underlining these kind of statements and references that are very Crowleyite. Schertl clearly is not, Schertl is definitely not like connected to Crowley, but very similar magical worldview outlook. And you can read about that in Prophet of Evil. So there's a lot of research, and maybe some of these Germans know a lot more of the OTO's connection to the Nazi Party than really is divulged outside of the research of people in Deutschland. I don't know. So it's a very strange overlap between Crowley and Hitler. There's no question.
And it seems crazy to me because when you think about like Operation Paperclip, when we brought over all these guys after the war, how much esoteric stuff was going on with all of the programs that they were doing. I wonder how much influence Crowley had. Like, are his tentacles reaching that far in? Like, I mean, it doesn't seem like far-fetched to me to think that.
I mean, I think a lot of these secret societies, they collect books, they have their own libraries, whether if it's the Masons or some of these other characters, they just collected these books. So people would probably have collected Crowley's books and read them and try to understand what he was thinking and integrated it. And that's what people are doing today. They're still using kind of Crowley as a springboard for their own research. But almost all modern occultists up to the present go through a Crowley period, whether they disregard him, whether they admire him, whether they view him as a prophet. I mean, there's always something that somebody know of Crowley and his work if you're kind of in the occult. For sure.
So, and you had mentioned that he had great influence on, like the Rolling Stones, and I remember the Beatles had a nod to him.
He was on the cover of Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah. So we see him kind of being carried through, heading towards 9/11.
I got one more question.
Yeah.
Sorry, before you get into it was right. So how because he's connected with Timothy Leary, correct? And kind
Crowley?
of yes.
Yeah, Timothy Leary actually there's a recorded video of him saying, Timothy Leary saying, "I'm carrying on the work of Aleister Crowley."
What?
So
wow.
So yeah. So
you can find it. You can just pull it up. Look up Timothy Leary mentions Aleister Crowley. It's on YouTube.
Well, we might have to pull that in. But so
it's actually very strange because I mentioned Crowley in Algeria with Newberg. Leary, once he got sprung out of jail, went to Algeria or Tunisia, and then traveled to the same kind of desert oasis that Crowley was in. It was called Bou Sada. And then he said, "My life and Crowley's are intertwined. The synchronicities are amazing." I don't remember exactly what it said, but it's in Children of the Beast. But he actually had Crowley's I Ching sticks. So he carried around Crowley's implements, so he knew all that. He would Leary would be involved in the tarot. So Leary was really a New Ager. And it's interesting, too, because Leary knew Aldous Huxley, right, who knew Crowley. So there's weird connections there. Like Huxley actually wrote a book called Do What You Will, which is incredible. Like it's a complete ripoff. Right. And there isn't a private collection somewhere, or if it's lost, I don't know, but there was a record of Crowley showing his artwork in Berlin, and one of the art pieces was a portrait of Aldous Huxley. So I think it was lost, and Crowley was rumored to be the person who gave Huxley magic mushrooms. So that's that. Right.
So I just wanted to pick up on that point because you would. What's very interesting, and maybe you do have an answer for this, or if you don't, that's all right. But he was instrumental in kind of, you had said, bringing in the sex and the drugs into these magical rituals. So that's so fascinating that about Timothy Leary, because if anyone's not familiar with him, he's I can't think of even Albert Hoffman wasn't as big of a proponent than Timothy Leary was of LSD and the psychedelic experience and hippie culture and all of that stuff, and that ties in with like the music that Aleister Crowley. The Beatles when they're
that's when they got weird, man.
That's when they got weird.
Yeah. That album.
And the same thing with Led Zeppelin. You correct me if I'm wrong with this. Is that was it Robert Plant bought the house on the Loch Ness Lake where Aleister Crowley did those rituals? That's correct.
Yeah,
right?
It was Jimmy Page.
Jimmy Page.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
he actually was a collector of Aleister Crowley's artifacts. So he would go to like art collections and buy up his books and his magic stuff and all those things. But Boleskine was one of the things that he purchased. So he had it and it burned down like 2 or 3 years ago. They're trying to rebuild it. But it's right there overlooking Loch Ness. So, pretty interesting stuff. Yeah. So they call a lot more. Crowley is probably considered one of the top 100 most important people in Britain. So most people kind of go through a Crowley phase. Right. They've read his stuff. They're aware of what he does. And it's much more like there's pictures of Sting with Crowley books. And a lot of these guys know, these musicians kind of know. And it still goes on today. I mean, there's all kinds of, there's Jay-Z with the Do What Thou Wilt, making magical signs that Crowley would make. So these guys are all, they're much more, there's actually some other guy who's like a flat out Crowley. He's actually African American, but he has Do What Thou Wilt over his back. Like he's a total believer. Crowley was really racist too. Like a lot of these people might not know how much of how nasty Crowley was, but
I'm sorry. Keep going where you're going to go.
Oh, yeah. So I guess what I was saying is like we see his influence weaving through. So makes it through the drug culture, the 60s. He's long dead now, but I'm still like, when you started, it was great because you were talking about the influence of the numbers. We had Flight 93 on 9/11, 9/11, 11. It was on September 11th. The buildings look like 11.
They're 110 stories long. They're a giant 11. 11 is a ideogram too, so it's a symbolizing of opposites. So there's all kinds of weird things, like just how important 11 was. And who built that? It's David and Nelson Rockefeller. So what's their connection to all this? There's actually an infamous picture of David Rockefeller on the cover of Newsweek or Time, and he's sitting there smiling at the picture, and his watch is at 9/11. And in the background, the Twin Towers are going up. And who's in the shadow of the Twin Towers writing 2001: A Space Odyssey? Kubrick and Clark. And what's Clark? No, total Mason. Clark is a full Mason. Stone cold Mason of the highest order. Yeah, knows all the occult stuff. They're both probably very involved in faking the moon landing. And how tall is the monolith in the 2001 Space Odyssey that you watch on the moon?
11 feet.
11 feet tall, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So these guys have integrated all these concepts into quote fiction, unquote. And very cleverly. And then you can go look up the Millennium Hilton in front of the downed Twin Towers, and it's just a huge monolith. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible, overseeing this huge sacrifice. Yeah.
So
these elites have a whole different religion. They are not Christian. I would say a lot of them at the top.
The $1 million question, William, is: so you believe 9/11 was a ritual?
I think so. It was ritualized. I think it was just somebody thought about it for decades or years. I think they had something planned for that event. I don't know what they were going to do, but the 2001, the new millennium, was a big event for occultists because the changing of the 1,000 years. So they're thinking on these long terms, just like Hitler. Really, I'm going to have 1,000-year Reich. So they're thinking on these aeonic ideas, aeonic change, just like Crowley. He talked about the new aeon, not the new age, but they wanted aeonic change. So I think that they just came up with something on 9/11 that was it. The numbers were right. The timing was right. And look at the famous George Bush New World Order
Yeah.
2000, what was it, 1990, 9/11 speech. I mean, it's literally 11 years to the day of the events of 9/11. That should tell you everything. Tells you everything about George Bush Sr. But
speaking of,
I mean, it's really powerful, and it indicates just total control of the system, complete control of the system.
complete control. You're right. Speaking of the Bush family, isn't there some kind of weird connection with Aleister Crowley and
Right. Well, Barbara looks like Crowley. She has a big head. You can put them side to side. It's not like they're two different looking people. She acts like Crowley. She's clearly not a Christian. She says all kinds of weird things. You know, when there was the whole Katrina thing, she's like, "Oh, these poor people. This is good for them to be in the, stadium, having, with no running water or whatever." So the story goes is Crowley gets kicked out of Italy in 1923. The Abbey of Thelema falls apart. He goes back to Paris. Paris seems to be a waypoint for him. He's in Paris. He's with his friend Harris, and his girlfriend was kind of O'Hara, I think his name. And Harris was kind of like an edgy, kind of sexually charged writer at the time, which was very scandalous. But Crowley is doing these rituals, and apparently O'Hara knew Pauline Pierce, right? Because Barbara is a Pierce. So it's known that Pauline Pierce went, like, that was kind of the big thing for the elites in America, was to go to the City of Lights in the 20s, right? That was kind of like when Paris was at its heyday. Now it's a huge dump overrun with migrants, much like London is a total dump now, apparently.
Yeah.
So these great cities have been migrants. That's a whole different story, but migration is actually a form of warfare. It's just a different type of warfare.
Amen.
But anyway, it's a full war. I mean, our own government's at war against us right now. Anyway, so unbridled immigration. I mean, migrants is the stupidest thing on earth. So anyway, they were at this City of Lights, and the rumor is that Pauline Pierce is involved in sex magical rituals with Crowley and Harris, and she becomes a servitor. And the timing kind of fits. It fits right. She comes back from Europe pregnant and gives birth to Barbara. And then I think that she met George W. Bush when she was 14 or 15, and he was 17, very young. I think even before he went to World War II. So all the timing kind of fits. And if you see a picture of her with her so-called family, she's a genetic outlier. She does not look like everybody else. So that's this whole story, is that she is the actual real offspring of Crowley, and that was the bloodline. If you are kind of like an elitist, that's kind of like your thing. It's like, well, how do you trace your genealogy and all that stuff? So that gives kind of credence to the 9/11 having this kind of Crowleyan element to it, is that it's a familial thing. It's not just an ideological idea. And then, the Bushes are all skull and bones, and that's also hereditary almost, going back to Prescott Bush. They have rituals. You get born again, you're initiated. It's just the whole bit. There's, signs of silence, all kinds of crazy stuff. So, so I think that that's pretty compelling evidence that something else is going on with Crowley. And Crowley kind of, he never really hung out with his children. He had 5 offspring, 1 died, but he just didn't. He was not a father figure to anybody. But he would, and even later in life, like, before he died in his late 60s, he had some woman said, "I want you to have my child." So he had that child. His name was Ataturk Crowley, and you can read about him. But he was a mess. He kind of started, he thought, he knew he was the offspring of Crowley. He wore all kinds of military regalia, but he never really amounted to much, other than kind of like a novelty act or something like that.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Are any of his children alive today?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
I think there were people who kind of made it out. There were children with Crowley, children that he had with 2 women. One was Hersig, and another I can't remember, when he was at his magical fraternity or magical thing at the Abbey of Thelema. So one of them made it to Berkeley. Like, I heard that she passed away after 9/11. So she lived a very long life, but she had a Crowley connection, like And I was up in the Northern California, like I might have walked by that person or had coffee with her, not to my, because I lived up there. But it's just one of those kind of weird things. They probably never mentioned that they knew Crowley. And not a lot of people would really admit friendship with Crowley. But he knew a lot of people. He was a very active letter writer. So a lot of you can go through some of his collections and you can just see him writing postcards and letters. And even when he was late in life, there was a compilation of his letters about magic to people that he would write, and it got compiled into a book called Magic Without Tears, Magic with a K, Without Tears. So he was faithful to his outlook, although at the end of his life he said, I might have been insane, I regret what I did, there seemed to be some self-loathing there. He was a flat-out junkie. He could not survive without heroin, massive amounts of heroin, like apparently. I don't know what the equivalent is, but in England at the time, it was like 10 grains of heroin a day. So he was a mess. Yeah.
I'm surprised he didn't die of some kind of sexually transmitted disease or something, you know.
There were rumors he had syphilis. He had asthma his whole life, so he had operations to help him to self-breathe better. And he was close to death at certain times. So from drug use, like he was addled from drug use that he did. Cocaine and all kinds of crazy stuff. Like what was the other one? Ether. He would snort ether, ETHER, which is really weird, and everything. You know, hashish, alcohol. But and you could see it later in his life. People said like his tongue was green. He had very deep set eyes. Like you can see the later pictures of him are available, and he looks like he hadn't slept in like 3 years. Like literally, like. You know, like he did not get into deep sleep or something. So, he was, but you know, all his personal relationships ended in disaster. His kids were kind of a disaster. His kids were a disaster. His children didn't talk to him. Some of the women, he told one, she'll make a good whore. Like that's what he said about his own daughter. Wow. One who died. Yeah, he's a monster. And the women just were wrecks. Like they either got abandoned to prostitution or ended up in a mental institution. You know, he branded all of his Scarlet Women with the mark of the beast, like a cow. So they had brands on their chest, and you can see the before and after Crowley pictures. They look haggard and unhappy and just haunted, really haunted. So,
I'm sure that was.
And once he was done, he would just leave them. Like, I found another woman. There was some like woman came from America to Europe to meet him, and he just dumped his last Scarlet Woman and went off with this girl, and then she dumped him. So it he was. But you know, the thing is that you were supposed to be true to your own will, which I think is a very selfish, self-centered worldview. So you just kind of like don't have any fealty to anybody else. You're your own god or whatever.
Yeah, that's what's so weird to like. To hear and just take a snapshot again of all these people, from Ernest Hemingway to the Beatles, you know, all these people, politicians in different countries, you know, prolific network of people that just seems so drawn to this guy who's like, I don't want to say, I'm going to keep it kind of PG, but at the very minimum saying he's a huge piece of crap just as a human being of treating everyone around him. He's a junkie,
druggie. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff
with like the kid, the
horrible stuff,
pedophile,
terrible stuff.
So was there anything? I guess maybe this is kind of a weird question, but where I was going with all of that, there has to have been something about him that I think people were somehow drawn to. I can't imagine, or he obviously had there wasn't some time that everyone just cut him off. And so if he was able to somehow keep this network going, do you think that there is any of these, workings, these rituals that he was doing for, some of them take a couple of years, if I'm not mistaken, of doing all these ritualistic things? Do you think that there was like these people around him actually getting any benefit from it? Do you think that they were engaging in these rituals with him? Was there, this is kind of, totally out of left field, were they directly gaining power? Do you think that they were becoming successful musicians afterwards because they are doing that kind of stuff? Or do you think that there was anything that he was doing that actually was working? Kind of a weird question.
Well, that's a good question. I've never practiced magic. I definitely grew up in the American culture, but I don't know. But I've talked to people who have. I talked to the occult rejects. They say magic works.
Yeah.
I mean, there's quotes from Jimmy Page where he looked into Crowley's system and he said it worked for him. So people would say there's like results. I don't know, but I guess if Crowley's promise isn't to be like the best person you can be, it's to be like a star. Every woman every man and woman is a star, as it says in the Book of the Law. So these are kind of selfish objectives to get money. Crowley was always doing rituals to get money, to be famous. So these are all what I would term carnal kind of objectives. So it's opposite of like where the Christian, where you like supposed to be the best person possible, follow these things, and then everything will be added to you, right? So it's kind of an end around about that, like to get inspired. And Crowley's trying to get ideas from entities or Satan or whatever. So
yeah,
I mean, for Crowley, I think it worked on destroying. I mean, being an awful human being and destroying other people's lives, and still destroying other people's lives to this day, and keeping people away from God, like the beneficence of Almighty God.
Yeah.
So I think that's. I would say that nothing is for me. Nothing is worthwhile about Crowley, but I think it's part of our world, and people go this route. So it's important. Like a lot of your celebrities, they love Crowley.
Yeah.
They love all this stuff, the 11s, and oh yeah, he's great, and blah blah blah. And you can see their reference. I mean, and these modern magic people like Marina Abramovich, who, she's probably just like what Crowley was, like somebody who's giving stories to the wealthy. Like whatever, I'll do these rituals, and you get paid. You'll get some kind of benefit. Like she's just another kind of occult witch, whatever.
Well, we do know in Scripture. I mean, you mentioned that Crowley went down to Egypt and Cairo, and spent time down there trying to learn. And if biblically, you look in the Old Testament when Moses was trying to get his people out of Egypt, the Pharaoh's magicians could do some of the same things that Moses was doing. He was doing it through the power of God. They're copying it, so we know there's some kind of power in this magic, we obviously. So, and he may have tapped into something, looking for it, found it, and then he was kind of stuck with it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't
think he was repentant.
No.
I don't think he was repentant even to the end. I think that was his thing. I think he was angry with God. He was attracted to the kind of dark forces.
Yeah.
And that was it. I mean, he was definitely in a mental institution. They sent him to a mental institution in Switzerland once in his later life. So I know that he wasn't mentally well at certain points of his life. But I mean, how much of his stuff like he could do? Like, he had tons of blood rituals. He advocated for human blood, and so as far as like what I think that Paul mentions them, the Pharaoh's magicians as Janus and Jambres, right? So I think that they were like that's who Moses was in conflict with. And you can go back and look at the Old Testament. The whole nation of Israel was in conflict with all kinds of cultists and Molech people and Baal worshipers. It's a consistent theme, whether it's Elijah and the priest of Baal or Jezebel, right? Or some of these other characters, like they popped up. So Crowley was, or actually Simon Magus, right?
Yeah.
So apocryphally, Peter contested with Simon. Simon, and I think it's in Acts. Yeah. He's like, where do you get your power?
That's right.
So they want power, right? They covet power. And I think that's what Crowley would want. Like he coveted power from his ritual. So it's much more biblical, I think, maybe than people might realize, just to know that this kind of modern person is part of this line. Crowley was the person who influenced Crowley the most was a guy by the name of Eliphas Levi. His real name was Constant. He was an ex-French Catholic priest He died in 1875. Crowley didn't translate his books. He didn't just think he was influential. Crowley thought he was the reincarnation of Eliphas Levi. So he's like he thinks he's part of this weird magical tradition
like
or whatever. Levi influenced, lineage. So Levi influenced Alfred Pike and Masonry.
Man. So
you see these kind of weird overlaps and cross-fertilization between different sections of occultism. But yeah, I think Crowley, that was just his view. That was just kind of his worldview. I think that he, for some reason, really went to the devil. He wanted to be the chief of staff of the devil. That's what he said. That's what he wrote.
So let me go back to 9/11 real quick. I keep bouncing back in this. When you mentioned that Crowley wanted to bring in this new aeon, this age of
Aeon,
yeah. And I remember hearing a bunch of, probably, man, I want to say is maybe 6 or 7 years ago about the age of Aquarius and this whole kind of new age that was coming in and this old age was leaving. Do you think that possibly this 9/11 event was sort of a kickoff for that, a ritual for kickoff for that new age to come forth and bring us into the next, phase of this elite rulership where now we're seeing the World Economic Forum, really, over the last couple of years, it's just out of nowhere, it seems like, even though they've been around since the 70s. And then just the insanity of world governments, like democracy or any type of freedom is just being strangled in some of the places you just don't expect.
Or even just ignored. Even worse, ignored. Constitutional rights ignored, Bill of Rights ignored deliberately, like taken out of schools, out of discussion. Look at how many intellectuals don't even mention the Bill of Rights or individual sovereignty. Like the new doctrine of really securing our freedoms is going to be, are we sovereign? The WHO is trying to steal sovereignty from us. I mean, some of these people are literal Judases of the American system are at the WEF. You can go watch John Kerry and Al Gore talking about all this nonsense about global warming, which is another huge psych war baloney, and Kerry's asking for money. So I do think that 9/11 was partial. It was an elite act, and I think it was, what's his name? There's an author who writes about the Bilderberg, and he said kind of a good quote, which is, the New World Order is really just the old world order, right? So it's just all of these elites like Crowley whose sensibility never worked. Like George Bush went to the store to get food. He didn't even know what it was to read the kind of food thing. He'd never seen somebody buy food at a store. Like they're totally detached, just like Crowley. They have no clue. So I truly believe that 9/11 there was a neo-feudal intent there. And all the money went up and all of the people that went off to war, useless wars, spending, who made the money, people who had money in defense. Yeah. The Patriot Act, which wasn't patriotic, actually took away a lot of our rights. So you can just go down the list. I list them in my book. I mean, I think it's pretty apparent that it was a huge social, political change event that benefited a very small amount of people. And, you can just go look at like BlackRock and all these other companies that just own huge slugs of the corporate system. I mean, it should terrify every American that these corporations are run by this secretive, huge financial entity that with no oversight, nobody knows their name. Nobody knows what it is, but there's the people feeding you information, feeding you your crappy food, taking away your ability to own your own house, leaving you in debt peonage. I mean, it's gone, baby. It's too late. You're fighting your way back. Like people who say, hey man, it's going to happen you must be blind. You must have like cattle, like a horse blinders on your eyes, because it's already happened. So, I mean, you could go back and look at my parents growing up. They could buy a house for $50,000. My dad made $5,000 a year, pay off the mortgage, have a house, have a family, pay for college very easily. That my generation's gone, baby. It's gone. And most people have been just mind raped by evil propaganda, by Luciferians, by drugs, porn. Yeah, it's people have already been plowed. They've already had their knives dulled. So
Yeah.
it's really the war's already been lost. It's really what's going to happen now from here. It's sad. It's really the truth. A lot of these Christian leaders kind of sad too. I mean, I don't want to go there, but I mean, some of these corporate minionists are really just money grubbers. To be honest.
Yeah, the corporate. It's literally a corpocracy. I don't even know how to say the word but it's basically big corporations are running things, and the government. Yeah, and we saw this with
it's not.
we saw this.
I will say it's not even just corporations, as in there's like a lot of them.
Oh right, there's like seven.
There's
right?
like 5 or 6. Yeah,
it's like. But and we saw it happen with the pandemic. When that happened, we saw the government didn't have to hand down local laws about, oh, you have to wear your mask, or you can't come in unless you're vaccinated. The stores would do it for them, and even though the stores were breaching all kinds of laws as themselves, in what they were doing, but they were actually becoming the strong arm for the government. They didn't have to do a lot. And I think you're just going to see more of that. And we got digital banking coming around the corner. It's dark, man. It's not looking
it's
good.
very dark.
Not for freedom.
Not looking good.
Yeah. But I mean, if you don't know Jesus, you better get on it now, because he's going to be the only way out of this thing, man. Like we
There's
say,
no question.
Yeah, we say that all the time.
It's a spirit. You're in like the most blatant, obvious spiritual war I've ever seen in my life. It is clear as day to me. The people who run this country are evil. They're Luciferians. They don't care about you. You can tell by just like this whole kill shot rollout. They're giving it to kids. They're giving mRNA to kids. So it's Molech level evil. These are the most evil people who've ever lived since the Nazis. So it's clear as day to me. And the fact that the Christian church cannot come together over all kinds of boundaries and say, hey, this is evil and spiritual wickedness, says everything.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Lukewarm and asleep, man, unfortunately. And,
So, I mean, I don't know how these people can escape damnation. I really don't. That's a biblical statement. Like, I don't know how they can. Like, you're a pastor?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Well, William, it tells us in the last days there's going to be an apostate, a great falling away of the church, that there's going to be a remnant that will hold true to the truth. And we see that, all through Scripture. But I think we're witnessing that right now, where I think we're witnessing a great falling away. And they're like masters of distractions, right? Like, I mean, what does magicians do? Like sleight of hand, right? So they're like on a huge scale, they're distracting people with this and that. And you don't even like take, for instance, recently that train that derailed in Ohio. The only place I saw information on it was the internet. I didn't see anything on mainstream news about it. There was just no reporting about it, and it's a disaster. And
It's a total disaster.
yeah, and the only people who are clued into
it
this,
shows your government. Your government. I mean, and the sad truth is that the American government doesn't represent the people anymore.
Right.
It's taxation without representation. So that's unfortunately where we're at. So I mean, and these are all like a lot of these people on the left. I'm not really happy with the right. But they won't say that it's the Biden administration taking away your constitutional rights by censoring. It comes from the government, from the White House, through these tech companies to censor people. I've been censored like 4 or 5 times. I keep getting kicked off of YouTube, Facebook. People are telling me what to think. Like this is neo-communism. It's neo-feudalistic communism. It's a disgrace. And it goes back to not fighting all the way back to 9/11, and even before that, some of these political assassinations that happened in this country, that people just didn't do anything, and people are still getting murdered. I mean, this whole shot rollout was the most incredible thing you could imagine. Yeah. And look at them poker facing it, all of them.
Yeah.
Fauci, Gates, Walensky, all these people. I mean, the guy who was like the head of the COVID task force is now Zients is now the head chief of staff of the White House.
Right.
So you have a guy overseeing mass murder, like hanging out with Biden.
Yeah.
It's off the charts. It's off the charts. Nothing like this has ever happened. People talk about Nuremberg too. It's worse. It has to be a completely new system if you're going to be safe.
Yeah.
They're just lying about everything. They lie like a devil. These are devils, man.
Mm-hmm.
These are monsters. I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating.
No,
If you can oversee and give out these shots to little kids, you're a killer. You're a child killer. You're an offense to God. You're the worst. These are the worst people.
Yeah, and then you have
in our country. Yeah,
and you have
horrible.
the whole transgender thing too, where they're just forcing these kids into ideologies.
It's Sodom and Gomorrah, dude.
Yeah.
No, it's a multi-pronged attack. It's like 10 prongs: cultural, political, spiritual,
economic.
It's all there, man. It's all
epic times
we're
living in.
I was going to say it's
worse than you think, worse than everybody thinks.
It's straight up like Crowleyan is like, his whole thing, and we didn't touch it for a good reason, but like we mentioned, sexual abuse of kids is like that's what you look at the transgender stuff. I mean, this is kind of crude, but like when I think of like the rulers, the powers that be, is like they want to kill or rape our kids or do both at the same time, one or the other, and it's like that's exactly the same thing that like Crowley was doing. Weird.
Look at how many people. Yeah, absolutely. Crowley was doing it too. Yeah, it's part of it. It's part of the thing. Crowley believed in the positive androgyne. He believed in the androgyne that he was, and he was androgynous. Really, he was bisexual. So all these people find probably a hero in Crowley. Somebody who changes things. Supposedly filed down his teeth into like lizard teeth, like sharp, pointy teeth. That's why there's never a picture of him smiling.
Huh. Yeah.
Never a picture of him smiling. So this is like part of that whole crime. That's bad.
It's the Baphomet.
It's weird too because I'm so old. I'm 54, and when I was growing up, like there was like bad things on TV, and people were like, "If you don't stop this now, it's only going to get worse." And everybody said, "Oh, come on, a little bit of a gay character. This is not a big deal." And then here we are, 2023, and there's like literal male transvestites dancing in front of 6-year-olds kids, singing WAP.
Yeah.
Like they were right. They were absolutely right.
Exactly.
They're absolutely right. So how do we get it back? I mean, the Amish are right on everything. Simple life, less technology, grow your own food. Ignore, don't assimilate to the common culture. Praise God. Help each other out. Build your own houses. Pay no debt. Don't have anything with the bank. Be happy with God with what you got.
Be
family, loved ones, kids. It's really, they were right, man.
Amen.
Amish were right.
If it has home in the front of it, that's what you want to stick with. Homeschool, homestead, right?
They got it. Now we got fake food. You got poison in your food. You got poison. I mean, look at the people today. They're being poisoned by seed oils and all this stuff. The crappy pharmacia. There's nothing good comes from big pharma. That's just a standard rule. They don't solve depression. These jobs are terrible. There's no real safety net. You got drugs everywhere. It's a disaster. The country's a disaster. I've watched it happen in my own life. It's incredible.
I mean, I'm your age, William. I'm 52. So we grew up in the same era, and I remember, my mom and dad paid $40,000 for their house that I grew up in, and you can't get a car for that price now.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, all it takes. I mean, they've got us over the barrel. I mean, they've got us in the worst way possible because, according to some stats, it's like the average half of the households in the whole country cannot afford an extra $500 expense. That's enslavement. You are a slave. Stop deluding yourself. Don't listen to the propaganda. The average American is a slave. They're just in a different type of technical. And now they're just creating a kill box where they can give you drugs or poison your food or poison your shots and kill you off. I mean, the slaughter. This year is going to be a terrible year of great suffering. I promise you. There's going to be a lot more dead people.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I could just look to these Christian leaders. I'm terrified of them. I really feel scared. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, I'm missing certain stuff. Maybe I'm not watching the right thing, but I just see them dancing in front of a stage. And to me, the pulpit is like, I don't know, man. I don't trust you. I don't trust you anymore.
There are some great churches. There are a handful of guys that I can. You're in the West Coast, right?
Yeah, West Coast, California.
Yeah, I mean, in Southern California, there's a lot of churches that are standing up for truth. They're teaching the Bible, and
MacArthur.
MacArthur's one. I think of like Jack Hibbs is another guy that is solid. He's a fairly, it's a mega church, but he's doesn't hold back at all, and he's not all about the money and all that stuff, like a lot of these mega churches get,
But it's like
they get too focused on the money,
Yes.
Entertainment too. It's like,
and there's like the it's like the psyop of you're having these younger kids, at least online, sort of becoming more traditional, pushing away from like the atheism. I'm a millennial. I'm 33 or 33. And I forgot what year it is. And so you have like these younger people, and I was just thinking about like the pastors and stuff. All we're getting pushed now in the media is not the good pastors standing up or preaching the Bible. It's like this it's all the gay stuff. Like it's like this gay pastor is kissing his
metrosexual
boyfriend.
looking,
It's just terrible. So they're just attacking like it's straight up with the church. Like the mainstream media is trying to make everyone, I feel like
everybody gay and it's okay. Is there an LGBTQ version of the Bible yet? Because that's the way they seem to be preaching.
I saw one.
the rainbow version.
I wouldn't be surprised. No doubt. I mean, it's scary. I'm terrified.
Yeah, it's.
Well, look, we know.
So
who
this
wins,
is like
though.
Crowley. This is Crowley's dream. Yeah, we know who wins in the end. So.
Yeah.
People need to really take care of themselves and really prep for a lot of stuff because they aren't letting up. I think a lot of these elections are stolen over the world.
Yeah.
And so you see this push for world government is really an international thing, and that's the best way to do it. I mean, it's incredible to think that. I mean, they had to have conditioned a lot of the public agencies for this deal to pull it off. So they had to pervert people in the CIA, people in the FBI, people in the Defense Department to pull it off who wouldn't revolt or wouldn't go against something as obvious as a theft as Biden supposedly getting 81 million votes. That's a total joke. So something really sinister has happened. And very strange to see, like the head of the CIA, Haspel or whatever, was at the WEF. She was at this like Event 201 stuff. You see a lot of these kind of other intellectuals over at the WEF. So they've been co-opted. And they probably aren't even co-opted. They just don't give anything about that past view of the nation state or sovereignty.
Yeah.
They're all on board with this new thing. And so people should be terrible.
Yeah, they don't even try and hide it anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally saw a quote from Klaus Schwab saying, we have godlike powers or something like that. It was this ridiculous quote recently. I mean,
I'm not surprised.
They're drunk on their own power. It's going to be a bad day.
Look at the successes. They've got people out of office. Trump.
Yeah.
They've gotten installed Trudeau. This guy Lula in Brazil obviously was fraud.
Yep.
So many places, man. I mean, those are the ones that we know.
And you saw,
I don't know what's happening.
You saw Lula. He's forcing the shot for people onto people for their benefits. Yeah,
because I mean, and that when you were talking about that overall, immediately I thought of Bolsonaro. Like the people are rising up. The military is like got his back, and then all of a sudden that just ends.
Just collapsed. Same thing with Trump.
Yeah,
Trump was up against it. They got rid of him, man.
Yeah,
he's done. I don't know how he thinks he's going to win this next election with all of these fake votes. I mean, it's not possible, especially with the vote machines. So.
Yeah. Well,
here's the other thing. The mail-in. All these things are frauds, and it's really part of the DOJ, the corruption of the DOJ for not doing anything. But I think DeSantis cleaned up a lot of the stuff in Florida for his vote. He won by a 15% margin. So that's probably the actual real margin in many of these other states. Arizona, Colorado, Pennsylvania. It's just that they've allowed this fraud to happen. So.
Yeah, I don't think this is probably the first time I've ever said it on air, so I'll err on the side of caution that anyone listening to this. But maybe I'll go into it a little bit offline afterwards. But yeah, I know for a fact, like people always say was privy. I did some work with some stuff that during the election, helping out a buddy of mine, and I think the raw numbers, like Trump won California. I tell people that, and they look at me and they're like, "There's no way that he won California." He pulled a Reagan, like the actual votes of won probably, I think he won all 50 states originally, but it's, there's no way. And
it's a color revolution. They stole in the middle of the night. They did the same thing in Venezuela. They pulled the same stunt in the Ukraine. So come on, they're just relying on people being totally misinformed on the national media.
Yeah.
People have to just get rid of it and just get rid of their TV. They really have to throw their TV in the garbage. It's just total garbage.
Yeah.
Get something else. Find some other way to watch stuff. Anyway, I got to run, guys. I got family over here.
Yes.
Anything you like? Yeah. Sorry, but
William, thank you for taking time with us, man. We really, really appreciate it. And we're going to put links to all your books and your website. And where's the best place people can?
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am on. Email is really the best way to communicate with me. So it's William Ramsey Investigates at protonmail.com. If you have any questions, you can buy my book, signed copies from William Ramsey Investigates. www.williamramseyinvestigates.com. What did I say? Proton Mail. And then I have 5 books, 5 documentaries on Vimeo, and then a lot of good Christian content on William Ramsey Investigates on iTunes if you want to check that out.
Cool.
Amen. Well, thank you so much again.
God bless. God bless.
Thanks,
you.
William.
Thanks for having me. All right, cheers. I got to run, guys. Take care.
See you, man.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the All Out War podcast today. If you had a blast, then we'd love to have you back for another episode. So please subscribe and leave a review. We love to hear from you. You can also follow us on Instagram at All Out War Podcast or on Twitter at AOWcast. These episodes are also available on YouTube unless they contain a little too much truth. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.